Hello everyone. I'm Andy, an instructor from ThinkMo. Currently, I'm teaching CCIE course. Starting today, I will share some CCNA, CCNP, CCIE related technologies with you. Our topic today is how to prevent illegal private connection of enterprise access switches. The technology we are talking about today is called port security. First, we have to understand what is port security. It is a technology applied to switches, mainly to prevent a case of illegal private access. Under what circumstances would? What about the illegal private connections we mentioned? For example, there are some in a company. So, what is an access switch? Is usually directly for connecting these end devices, like a printer, my PC, and so on. Then the server, these devices. We call it terminal equipment. Then these terminal devices to be connected to the station switch. Then the station switch. Call it accepting switch. Under what circumstances should I prevent illegal private connections? Usually in some companies, to keep things relatively safe. For example, in some companies, we are limited to connect the PC provided to you by the company, or the company's server, or network equipment. There is no problem connecting to this switch, and using the internet can be connected. But if you say it's your own, you got a TB link at home, your Wi-Fi signal is not good, or a router you want to connect to in the company's network. Purpose of boosting Wi-Fi signal. Of course, we are just giving an example. For business, whether it's the wireless we mentioned, still wired. If we want to limit outside equipment when connected to my network, how should it be restricted? This is what we refer to as port security. A role played at switches dynamically learned MAC address. Convert to a secure MAC address. So since we talk about the concept of MAC address, everyone should know port security. It must be a second-tier technology. Is for the MAC address. It converts to secure MAC. After conversion to secure MAC address, when there are other, when foreign equipment is connected, data sent to, when the interface of the switch is, the switch will detect the MAC address it learned from this interface, not this MAC address. It is not a secure MAC address. So this time the switch will deny forwarding data traffic. That means refusing to accept your traffic. This is what we mentioned. To prevent such a situation of illegal private access, it is by learning the MAC address. Of course, not necessarily through dynamic learning. It can also be manually bound by artificial. This way is also possible. And some other ways. Another one is related to the MAC address. Link to a question. In the process, as long as you don't belong the secure MAC address on this switch, I can enable port security. Make appropriate restrictions. You can't use the internet after you are connected. That is equivalent to not connecting. This is the first aspect we mentioned. What is port security? Then the second aspect. In which scenarios is port security mainly applied? It is mainly used in our access switches. The second is the aggregation layer switch. We usually know the performance of access switch is relatively poor. It has very little memory. Then it can hold a limited representation of MAC addresses. Once encountered some external attacks. For example, I keep asking your switch send data. Then I change a MAC address. Some attack software. I will change a MAC address to send you data. Based on this situation, Your switch. It is possible to learn multiple MAC addresses. The situation we mentioned will cause the MAC address table to overflow. Because we know that for a switch, I learned this MAC address. Enough MAC addresses later. That is to say, more than the switch can after accommodating the MAC address representation. Can't study anymore. Even if the MAC address learned later cannot cover the MAC address in the original switch. Of course, this attack definitely for multiple interfaces. The same interface. It is the case that will form an overlay. For example, in a corporate intranet, due to illegal access, some devices are connected. Then it led to the entire LAN-like device infected with the virus. Words initiated at the same time may cause this MAC address table overflow. Of course, anyway. Can't let it in for safety's sake. This is the access switch. The aggregation layer switch. What is it mainly used for? Aggregation layer switch. In the words of application port security technology, mainly to limit the number of access users. What is the limit of the number of contact users? That is to say, for convergence, I can put the corresponding the user's MAC address is set to it as secure MAC. Based on this, when other devices are connected, because there is a function in port security, is that you can set a maximum number of secure MAC addresses. I set up to allow only 5 devices to access. Then I put the MAC addresses of these 5 devices. Set it to after converting to a secure MAC address. When there is a 6th device, when entering, at this time I will deny you access. This is what we mentioned. Aggregation layer switches and access switch. This involves port security. Problems with application scenarios. The third aspect. How to implement port security. Very simple question. Port security actually only needs one command. If it is for a certain interface, then we can directly in the switch. Enabled on the interface. Port security feature. At this time my switch, when it learns dynamically after a MAC address, it will automatically convert to a secure MAC address. Then in the process, maximum number of secure MAC addresses. What is the default? Default maximum security MAC. The number of addresses is 1. Then we can adjust the MAC address accordingly. We won't go into too much detail on this. What's next? This port security can be enabled. Actually, we can now use an experiment. Let's just take a look. This is a switch. 2 PCs are connected below. PC 1 and PC 2. Now PC 1 and PC 2. Via G001 and G002. Connect to this switch. And now you can enter G001. Port secure by default is not turned on. We need to manually enable port security after the order. There is also a log reminder. Port security features already opened. Next, use PC 1. Go to ping PC 2. IP addresses of PC 1 and PC 2 is already configured. We ping PC 2 directly. It's a pass now. Then let's take a look at the MAC address representation. Now there are 2 entries in it. One is the 3122 we see. Then VLAN1. Port is learned by G001. Type is security. Of course, there is still an original. MAC address entry is G002. Is learned dynamically. That is to say, as long as port security is used under the interface. Then learn the MAC address. It will be under the maximum number of secure MAC addresses. Convert MAC address to secure. Next, I put the MAC address of PC1. Give it a change. For example, change to 33. Let's change it. Apply it. Now let's see if it can ping. Now you can see that the ping is not working. Then, for the console on one switch, a log appears. This log will indicate that due to violated port security, maximum MAC address limit exceeded. MAC addresses are by default a, so the switch takes the appropriate action. The status of this port is one rest rack. What does retract mean? This is what sent you. Data is discarded, and the corresponding log pops up in the console. That is the alarm log we mentioned. Remind you of illegal private access happened. Then later we see that there are two protect. It's a bit like rest rack. After it receives your message, will be discarded immediately. Then no log is generated. The third is the shutdown we mentioned. Shutdown on the interface. After receiving the message, it will automatically shut down the interface. Does not automatically restore. Here are the 3 penalties we mentioned. That's what we've been talking about. A basic concept of port security. This concludes our sharing today. If you have any other techniques you would like to learn, welcome to leave a message or private message me. If you are interested in what I have to say, hope to like, share and subscribe. Thanks. See you next time.